my personal top 25 favorite books. And these are not necessarily or even close to being the most literary 25 books or even the best that I've read in my lifetime, short lifetime. But these are the ones that I most look forward to rereading. So that's pretty much the criteria here. I mean, some of them are solid pieces of literature in addition, but basically they're just my favorites. Without getting too complicated. I realize there are no women in here as I look at the list of the 25, and no non-Americans, I don't believe. I didn't set out to do that intentionally. I've had plenty of enjoyment from the classic world of respected literature. For example, Dickens, Dostoevsky to an extent, Turgenev, Flaubert, people like Jane Austen, Stendhal, The Charterhouse of Parma. That was one of my favorites for quite a while. That would probably have made the list. And, of course, James Joyce and Conrad, Joseph Conrad, The Heart of Darkness. Those are a little more complex, a little tougher. I was an English major, so, of course, I was force-fed a bunch of the classics, which is good and bad. It gets you to read them, but you're reading them in a little bit more of a pressure situation. You're worried about getting a good grade, etc. But I do appreciate the classics and the often complex themes. But again, the list is based on, in part or maybe in full, on how excited I would be today to reread these books. Recently, I reread Moby Dick and Huckleberry Finn, which we were told growing up and in college and lit classes by most professors were the two greatest American novels, two greatest. So I reread them a few years ago with no pressure to see, and decades later. They were both impressive on multiple levels, but I really didn't have any desire to reread either one once I got through them the second time. So I had the same experience recently with rereading Crime and Punishment, and the same with Great Gatsby, the novel everybody raves about. Same with Hemingway, who used to be my favorite, actually. Short stories. The Sun Also Rises was definitely one of my top favorites for a long time, but I reread it recently, and it just didn't quite do it for me the same way. Also, Hemingway's first short story collection, In Our Time. It is a classic, and that was a favorite once, but had the same experience rereading it. I appreciate them all, but just not fired up to go back in, as I am fired up, to a degree, to go back into the top 25 favorites that are going to follow here. As far as women, Willa Cather is a simple pleasure. I happen to love Willa Cather. It takes you to places that you want to go. Simple, rural, just very pleasant. And a favorite also has been Flannery O'Connor, her stories. They're very impressive, but she's too deep, too much work for me. I can't always understand the stories. I've had to battle through them. Same with Virginia Woolf. Too tough. Impressive, but very difficult, not smooth. For a one-shot novel from a woman, it's hard to ignore Harper Lee and, of course, To Kill a Mockingbird, and that almost made the list, but not quite. So, honorable mention. I can't resist throwing this one in. Guy named Rex Bolt. Not a true candidate for this list, but the book Who Needs Justice is reasonably entertaining, or so I've been told. The guy tries to take the best of Hammett, Chandler, Ross MacDonald, James M. Cain, Highsmith, and Elmore Leonard. I ran into a guy once in a Starbucks who was reading my book, Who Needs Justice. He was all excited about it. He was halfway through, and he kept telling me how it reminded him of his favorite writer, Dashiell Hammett. And I'm saying, okay, that's good. Then I saw him about a month later, and he ignored me, kept ducking me. So I realized what happened. For whatever reason, he didn't finish the book. And so he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He's embarrassed because he was so excited about it. In fact, that day in Starbucks, he excused himself. Yeah, I got to get going because I got to go home. I got to continue the book. I'm so into it. So he actually cut our conversation short. He claimed to go read the book, but then when I saw him, a month later, he pretended he didn't see me. He ducked me in Starbucks. That happens. Number 25, North Dallas 40 from 1973. Pete Gent. The novel exposes the dark side of the NFL. And it's the way he sets it up, it's wonderfully encapsulated into an 8-day stretch of the season, right in mid-season. And of course, Gent himself was an ex-Dallas Cowboy wide receiver, so it rings fully authentic. 24, A Separate Piece from 1959. And this is a gripping coming-of-age novel by John Knowles. And it follows the characters Gene and Finney at a New England prep school in the 1940s. And I first read this as an assigned book in high school, but then visited it again decades later, and to me it holds up perfectly. 23, Journal of a Novel by John Steinbeck. This is a series of letters written to a friend. Pretty interesting compilation. Between the end of January and the end of October in 1951, during which Steinbeck was working out east of Eden. And the collection of letters was published in book form in 1968. So about 17 years later. The letters are fascinating, and they touch on many subjects. They are part autobiography, part perspective on Steinbeck's creative process, which is always fun. And they give you a nice glimpse of Steinbeck, the private man. And my opinion would probably be offensive to many literary scholars to say this, but these East of Eden letters, in my opinion, were better than the actual book, which I read years ago. Maybe I should give it another rereading, but these are good. This is good. It's better than reading the book, East of Eden. Number 22, the great Pete Hamill, A Drinking Life. This is really an all-absorbing, brutally candid memoir from the career New York Daily News and New York Post reporter, columnist, and eventual, I'm pretty sure, editor of both papers, if I remember right. At one time or another, he served as editor of both of them. He has a great story to tell, starting with growing up in an Irish family near Prospect Park in the 1940s. And he writes it so darn well. He doesn't waste a word telling it. Whole thing's kind of like one big column or bite-sized small columns rolled into one as a flowing continuous story. His depiction of being at a bar in Northern Ireland, of all places, when word came that Kennedy had been assassinated, is priceless. That's worth the price of the book alone, that scene. 21, Larry McMurtry, The Last Picture Show from 1966. It's set in the small fictional town of Thalia, Texas in the early 50s. The book centers on two guys and their friends transitioning from high school and stumbling towards adulthood. Mainly the two guys, though. And again, against the backdrop of their bleak hometown, which is, in significant decline at that point. Despite the bleakness, though, there are moments of hope and connection, beautifully rendered by McMurtry. Lonesome Dove, of course, is considered his master work. But, you know what? I'll take The Last Picture Show. I've read them both. 20, All the President's Men from 1974. You have the young Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein investigating the 1972 break-in at the Watergate office building and the subsequent political scandal. But this really is not only one of the great pieces of reporting ever, but also one of the great detective stories as they're trying to piece it together and figure it out. And there's time pressure and there's suspense. And it's kind of everything rolled into one. An amazing effort by these two guys. Number 19, Stephen King, 11/22/63. King with an amazing output, unparalleled. Pretty much 2 novels a year for 30 years. And 2 lengthy, chunky novels, often approaching 1,000 pages or going over. Though again, when you break it down as someone who's trying to do some writing myself, if you do 2,000 words a day, in a month, you've got, it's sort of a short novel. 30 days, you actually have a 60,000 word rough draft of a novel. So to write a 90 or 100,000 or 150,000 word, you just apply the same thing, 2,000 words a day, and don't go to bed until you've done those 2,000 words. And King, the thing about King, though, he has a discipline to do it day after day, year after year. It's very hard. You can do it for a period of time, which I've experienced. But just to sit down every day and come up with 2,000 words that are decent is actually an amazing feat, even though 2,000 words on any given one day is not that difficult. It's, a couple of pages, basically. But I've read about a quarter of Stephen King's novels, if he's got 60 or 70 of them. And to me, several of them are uneven. They're all fun. That's one thing, though. They're fun, and it feels like King is having fun. The reader gets that. You want to be a part of that. The guy's having fun writing them, and that comes across. But they're all fun, but again, several are uneven. A lot of them, to me, are overwritten, where he just, gets off on something, goes crazy, or even goes on side tangents a little bit, but just because he's enjoying it. But all the books are entertaining. I would still put 11/22/63 at the top, though, of the King chain. Published in 2011. And again, it's a well-known plot by now. A guy figures out he can time travel to specifically 1958. And there's something that's in the present that he wants to reverse. And so he decides if he goes back to 1958, sort of intercepts a situation that he can reverse it, and the present day person will be better off than he is now. You have to buy into time travel, but you don't really have to buy into major science fiction. Just, if you buy into the fact that somebody can travel back, there's not too much else. There's not ghosts and apocalypses and horror stuff. It's just pretty straight if you just sort of let your guard down for that one element. Anyway, then he realizes, geez, if I can hang around back in 1958, I can not only take care of the problem I came back for, but actually, geez, I can stop Oswald if I can hang around for 5 years. So it's actually a wonderful portrayal of a simpler era, but in the framework of some serious suspense, no doubt about it. King apparently wrote an earlier ending, which his son got him to change. His son is a writer also. But I actually think in reading both endings, I think the earlier one is better. Less sentimental, but the current one, maybe they wanted more sentiment there and it had a sweet conclusion. But it's a good book. I've read it twice, maybe more. I can't remember, but at least twice. 18, Life is a Wheel, Bruce Weber. That's a 2014 nonfiction account of a guy in a midlife crisis bicycling coast to coast. Bruce Weber is a career journalist, longtime obit writer for the New York Times. I think he might have been the fiction editor at Esquire at one point. He's a player in publishing, no doubt about it, in journalism. He was also featured in the documentary Obit. He was, I think, the main writer featured in that. Very good documentary. And that demonstrated that obituary writing is an art form for sure. Along the route, he develops new confidence in his powers of endurance. and an appreciation of the rich variety of the U.S. landscape. He wrote all day, and then he'd make these entries at night in motel rooms. I myself was lucky enough to bicycle coast to coast as a teenager, and I was right with Weber on this one. 17, The Quarterback Speaks to His God by Herb Wilner. These are 12 linked stories from 1987. Nothing to do with football other than the writer once played it in college. Wilner had an uneven career as a novelist. He was a well-respected writing and literature professor in California, but he kind of an uneven career as a successful novelist. But he really comes up with his masterpiece at the end here, after being diagnosed, unfortunately, with a fatal heart condition in his late 40s. So he knew he was in a dire jam here, and he just let these rip. He spent a fair amount of time in the hospital as he was writing these, in and out, but he just let these go. Most of the stories are, again, in hospital settings, but it's amazing how precise and objective, and at times humorous, the stories are, given his own terrible circumstance. That's worth seeking out. Under the radar, The Quarterback Speaks to His God. Herb Wilner. 16, Rabbit at Rest. The great John Updike from 1990. It took me a few decades to commit to this series, but when I finally did, it got the hooks in. The books were written pretty cleverly, actually, 10 years apart. So he tries to advance the character by a decade in each new rendition. This is the fourth and final one, though Updike did add a later novella that continued the story of the family after the main character Rabbit dies. I think that might have also been 10 years after this fourth book, Rabbit at Rest, was written. That was actually pretty good, the novella. I mean, because you didn't expect much with the main character gone, but he continues it. But in Rabbit at Rest, he and his wife, Rabbit and his wife, have retired mostly to a condo in Florida. And the guy is so consumed by his own existential worries that he misses more important problems in life and in his family. And all over the place, actually. There are plenty of themes in the book, but forget all that. It's rich, but down-to-earth prose. And it's just a great story. Great, simple story on the surface. That's all you need. Number 15, Wiseguy. The 1985 nonfiction account from crime reporter Nicholas Pileggi, speaking for Henry Hill, basically, who is a mob guy who turns informant, had to turn informant, got in a situation, and he had to go in the witness protection, etc., at the end of the book, at the end of the story. But the energy and the language and the situations, not to mention the fact that it's real life drama, which you've read about in the papers, various aspects of this, are just great. This one grabs you from the opening line, honestly, and it never lets up. Wiseguy, 1985. 14, Bad Blood by Richard Levine. This is a 1982 true chronicle of a 1975 family murder in Marin County, California. This is brilliantly presented as a psychological drama centered on two young people, but it's a book about suburbia at that point, and to an extent the breakdown of the middle American family in the mid-1970s. This one's hard to put down. It is disturbing, but also thoughtful and very tautly written. It should be a model for true crime books, in my opinion, this one. Bad Blood, Richard Levine. 13, James Dickey. The great James Dickey, Deliverance, from 1970. Still to this day, a stunning, powerful, gut-wrenching nightmare of a novel. 3 city boys taking on the Georgia backwoods and wilderness in a couple of canoes. Dickey's powers of description really stand alone here as he ratchets up the tension, but while conveying the beauty of the land and, in theory, the experience. Interesting that in the movie version, James Dickey himself plays a small-town southern sheriff at the end. He does such a good job being a good old boy there. It's hard to make the connection that this guy, even in character, could have written this master work. Number 12, Leonard Michaels. I Would Have Saved Them If I Could, from 1975. A collection of brilliant short stories. Michaels' prose is addictive. These are 13 taut, spare tales of, well, you have to admit, sex, love, gossip, argument, friendship, guilt, and rage. Michaels can inject brutal humor into his stories, but also refreshing frankness. Very frank author, really speaking to you from the heart. The guy also has a tremendous ear for the vernacular. Great energy here. Everything, every word, every story, every word from Michaels from this collection, fully rereadable. Fresh. Number 11, Chasing the Lion by Rob Dinerman. I'm looking at an updated version from 2021, but I believe the book was written a few years earlier, the original. This is my favorite memoir. This depicts Dinerman's experience at the highest end New England prep school, which is the Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, from 1968 to 72. Beautiful time frame there. And the story continues into what he calls the undulating relationship he forms with the school during the decades following. So it's pretty fascinating all around. Dinerman's mindset is at all times and on all topics very intriguing, very unique, highly unique. This one should be required reading for anyone interested in prep schools or for anyone who enjoys great literature. I absolutely mean that. 10. Patricia Highsmith, Cry of the Owl, from 1962. I have read most of the Highsmith catalog. Maybe all of it. Maybe a couple of little-known things slipped through the cracks that they re-released, republished in the last, 10 or 15 years. But pretty much all of it. And, of course, I fully enjoyed the 5 Ripley books. They're just a riot. Amazing, quite amazing. But I seem to favor Highsmith novels for a favorite list like this that are set in the U.S. I don't know why I like that. A Dog's Ransom from 1972 is also a contender here. I flip-flopped those two. That has a Manhattan couple who has their little dog kidnapped, and a young New York City cop takes it personally, and he's trying to help them find it, including going off duty, and it's kind of a wild ride. And it's tough to kind of look away from that one. But anyway, the one I've gone back to more than the others of Highsmith's is Cry of the Owl. And you have probably a decent but a lonely working guy, and obviously probably slightly unhinged, as most of her characters are, her main characters. But he's in a small Pennsylvania town, but he gets drawn into the life of a woman who he watches through her kitchen window. And as only she can do it, Highsmith, with a sense of danger, wire to wire in this one. The Cry of the Owl. Number 9, David Foster Wallace. A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. A collection of nonfiction from 1987. 2 pieces stand out specifically. Wallace, he goes on a cruise ship, paid by a magazine, I think Harper's, to go on a cruise ship to the Caribbean aboard a Celebrity Cruise Lines megaship. And he reports in a degree of detail that really should embarrass most journalists. Just a phenomenal reporter. It's like a camera, taking it all in and writing it down perfectly. I mean, letter perfect. The other one, equally detailed, which the other one that stands out in here, this collection, is where he takes on the excesses and actually vulgarities of a week at the Illinois State Fair. He's from the Midwest. Spends a week at the fair and writes that whole thing up. Again, non-judgmentally, just with a camera's eye. Just, delivering the snapshots. It's just pretty amazing, considering he's known as a novelist and short story writer. But this is great work. There are 5 more pieces, all gripping. The whole shebang is chock full of footnotes also. And wit. He's very funny. I've read all of Foster Wallace's short stories. I've read lengthy excerpts from Infinite Jest, but I don't think I'm going to tackle that one. But to me, this is best work right here. A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, collection of nonfiction, 1997. Number 8, Tom Wolfe, I Am Charlotte Simmons. This is a novel from 2004. It's a tough choice with Wolfe, and this would not be considered his best or his most famous. I've enjoyed them all. I've read them all. I've read pretty much all his nonfiction, his collections as well. But again, this novel, I Am Charlotte Simmons, is the one I most enjoy coming back to. So that explains it. No more complicated than that. You have a girl from a poor rural town who gets accepted to an elite college in North Carolina, which resembles Duke. The school has a top-ranked basketball program and, in theory, an Ivy League caliber academic curriculum, but Wolfe brings out beautifully how the excesses, sex, alcohol, and social status essentially trump everything else during her college experience. I noticed the book got mixed reviews, but too bad. To me, a masterwork of reporting turned into fiction. Really not that different, ultimately, than the David Foster Wallace efforts. Number 7, Ethan Canin, The Palace Thief from 1994. These are 4 longer stories, sort of short novellas, than in Canin's first collection, which was called Emperor of the Air, which was also very good. Those are more standard-length short stories. These are longer. But after this book, Canin, I believe, mentioned he had no further interest in the short form and would be writing strictly novels from here on out. That's too bad, because he was so gifted with the short stories and novellas. But in any case, here you have 4 different setups entirely, but it's unified to the reader. The characters struggle to understand, pretty much in all 4 cases, the unexpected turns their lives have taken. All 4 are full of wit, wisdom, and empathy. I can reread any of the 4 and honestly turn around and reread that exact story, short novella, no problem, right away again. Just can't quite get enough. Not sure I can say that about any other short story writer, honestly. Number 6, Jim Bouton, Ball 4. I first read this one in the summer of 1970 when it came out. It was a diary of a baseball season from Bouton, who once starred with the Yankees and was now hanging on as a bullpen pitcher for the first-year expansion Seattle Pilots. And he continues the diary late in the season as he's being traded eventually to the Houston Astros. But the entries themselves are so well constructed. He gets in, he gets out, and you're right with him within the framework of the pitcher's day-to-day life on the road during the season. Since, as with many players, you're always on the road, even when you're playing home games in Seattle. You're never settled in your adopted hometown. You're always basing on the road. The book was, of course, highly controversial in exposing many unflattering bits and pieces on the sport and the players, especially at that time. There had been nothing like it. Bouton's candor in conveying basically his own anxiety about his declining abilities and also his unsatisfactory relationships with his teammates. That was very refreshing. There haven't been too many books like this before or since. Certainly not now. You don't get these kind of sports books anymore. Players, there's no incentive for a player to write a book and tell all. And they don't want to jeopardize their career, even when they're done. They don't want to jeopardize their endorsements and everything else. So it's not worth it. But again, very refreshing, start to finish, and based on a recent rereading. What do we got? About 50 years later, 55 years later, it still is. Just as dynamic. Number 5, Raymond Carver, Will You Please Be Quiet, Please, from 1976. This is Carver's first book. His second book, collection of short stories, was a breakout 5 years later. That was called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And his other collections, including Cathedral, are very powerful as well, but nothing quite like that first book when you came to Carver fresh, which in my case was the very first one. Not sure any American writer before or since has pulled off the combination of brevity and intensity quite as well. So hard to do this, anybody who's trying to write. To leave out the right things and get the order of the words right. Very, very difficult. I also appreciate that Carver, he rarely ties up a story into a neat, tidy resolution. He typically leaves you off with his ordinary working class characters continuing their everyday struggles. And the stories often end abruptly. And that's great. No dumb themes or meanings that he hits you over the head with, even though they exist in there and people study the stories for those reasons. But to me, just wonderfully played slices of life that you can't resist embracing and returning to. Number 4, Jerzy Kosinski, Steps, 1968. Powerful, haunting, and like nothing I'd read before when I first read it decades ago, and it still has bite. The guy had a clinical, objective voice, which drives the narrative. The book is a series of fragments, stories, reminiscences, brief anecdotes, and brief dialogues, all written in the first person. He doesn't name any characters, he doesn't name any places, which in this case is exactly appropriate. Fragments are sometimes loosely connected to each other, but other times they have no connection. But the damn thing just works. Kosinski's fun. He has a different take than any other author. And all his novels are worth checking out, but to me, Steps stands alone. Number 3, Elmore Leonard, Swag, 1976. There's so many great Leonard setups in his books. There's the one, for example, where a guy, 20 minutes to go, his last day on the bomb squad, gets a call to defuse a bomb. Another guy, a trick circus high diver, is at the top of his rig, 60 feet in the air, setting things up for his performance the next day. He's just getting it organized there. And no one's around down below or anywhere. But one guy down below shows up and shoots another guy. I think it's a guy, maybe the diver's rigger who'd been helping him with the scaffold and everything else. All of a sudden, one guy shoots that guy. And as that guy then is hustling out of there to try to get away with it, he takes one glance back and he happens to spot the high diver way up there on his perch. I mean, what a great way to start a book. But I've read Leonard's full catalog. I've read them all. Except for the Westerns, though, I've read 3 or 4 of those as well, and they were awfully good. But in the Westerns, his style hadn't quite evolved to where it is when he starts writing crime fiction. So of the non-Westerns, I prefer the Detroit set books the best. The Florida novels also very good. Not to diminish the still great L.A. ones, New Orleans, Atlantic City, all the other locations. I think he's got one in the Caribbean. But they're all great. But something about the early Detroit set books, those get the hooks into me the most. But that said, the very difficult call that it is, I'm going to pick Swag at the top of the heap of Elmore Leonard books. In the book early on, the character Ryan, one of the 2 main characters, Ryan has 10 rules of happiness, which he writes out on a cocktail napkin. And I'm happy to hear about his rules at that point and what follows over and over. And Leonard's trademark, clean, letter perfect, ring true dialogue is not only at its best here of all his books, but I'd say it's the best dialogue in any American mystery, thriller, detective, procedural, crime, whatever else you want to call them, ever. Number 2, Mark Harris, It Looked Like Forever, 1979 novel. This one caps off his brilliant baseball-connected Henry Wiggins series as the 4th and final installment. The previous installment having been written in 1957. So It Looked Like Forever advances Henry by the appropriate 20 years as a character, from a young star with everything ahead of him to an aged veteran trying against common sense basically to hang on for another season. And the book it's often light. It's injected with the same humor as the first 3, which is quite brilliant throughout. And it brings back the same wonderful first-person vernacular from Henry. But at the same time, it's a complicated story. It's light on the surface, but it's complicated as this guy struggles to not only accept his role as a former baseball star, but now as a middle-aged everyman, just blending back into normal society. There's a scene where late in the season, at a chilly, unimportant night game, when the team is out of the pennant race, doesn't mean anything, you're just playing out the string, he gets up and he starts throwing in the bullpen because he told someone he would. Someone who came to the game for the first time to ever see him. And Dutch, the manager, gets on the phone down to the bullpen and asks, what are you doing? And he says, I just thrown because I told someone I would, loosening up. So Dutch says, well, why don't you come in, throw a couple innings in a real game? So he does. He goes in, he faces 6 batters, 2 innings, and he's just has it all going. It's just one of those perfect nights, which he'll never have again, but it's just everything's working for him. Ball's doing what he tells it to do, as he explains. The ball done what I told it. But the final guy, big power hitter, and he gets 2 strikes on that guy, and then he's able to sneak a fastball past that final batter and strike him out. And the batter gives him a look like, what are you doing? You can't throw a fastball. But if you use 1 fastball for 6 batters, you can get away with it sort of at the end of your career once. I mean, literature doesn't get any better than the final exchange Henry has with Dutch when he returns to the dugout. Number 1, favorite book of all time, at least in 2025, Donald Westlake, The Hook, the novel from 2000. This is a tale of twisted psychological suspense between 2 characters who are both authors. One is a successful bestseller, big-time bestseller, and the other one, Wayne, who may be the better writer, and once made a living at it himself, not a great living, but a solid living. He's struggling now, can't get anything published anymore. And when they meet at the Mid-Manhattan Library, he's reduced to looking up colleges to contact for a teaching job. This is just before the internet amps up, so he's doing it physically, looking up catalogs and writing to colleges. But he doesn't want to do that. The best-selling guy, Bryce, has writer's block bad and a major contract deadline looming. And he's just trying to do a little research to try to jumpstart himself for his new book, but he's not getting anywhere. He's all screwed up. So over Bloody Marys, leaving the library and going around the corner somewhere, they make a deal. No doubt Westlake takes the setup from Patricia Highsmith. But the story goes its own way from there. I picked the hook number 1 because this book is the simplest, cleanest, most perfectly written book I've read. And I probably read it, at least a half dozen times by now. Every time I come away shaking my head at the effortlessness and beauty of the construction. It looks and feels and reads simple, but that is exactly what is so hard to pull off. It's also a bird's eye view of the publishing industry back then and of the New York social scene at the turn of the millennium. Very, very interesting all around. And it's also the best book I've read about writers and writing. But above all, this one is just so damn entertaining. So that's it. Okay, you need anything else? Thanks for listening. Marys, leaving the library and going around the corner somewhere, they make a deal. No doubt Westlake takes the setup from Patricia Highsmith. But the story goes its own way from there. I picked the hook number 1 because this book is the simplest, cleanest, most perfectly written book I've read. And I probably read it, at least a half dozen times by now. Every time I come away shaking my head at the effortlessness and beauty of the construction. It looks and feels and reads simple, but that is exactly what is so hard to pull off. It's also a bird's eye view of the publishing industry back then and of the New York social scene at the turn of the millennium. Very, very interesting all around. And it's also the best book I've read about writers and writing. But above all, this one is just so damn entertaining. So that's it. Okay, you need anything else? Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening.